Hello. So 14 years ago, I wrote my debut stand-up comedy special, and this week, in 2026, it has re-entered a stand-up specials chart on YouTube. It was referenced by Barry Ferns of Barry's Economics and James Acaster, who said,
Louisa is someone who I think, again, What Would Beyonce Do is one of the most significant shows of my generation of comics. Um, and again, very easy for people to write it out of history, I think, or
Yeah.
people who don't know about it, who didn't come up at the same time as it, to not really appreciate what it meant. That show legitimized the free fringe in a way that
Yeah.
shows before, which had all been brilliant, but hadn't quite done yet. And obviously, John Kearns is one of my favorite comedians, and him winning the newcomer also legitimized the free fringe. But the year before him was Louisa doing that show and doing a show that she had put loads of her own money into the PR, which she didn't have loads of cash lying around. She really went all in. It was very easy for comics to be cynical about that and go like, look how much, Louisa's putting into the PR for her Free Fringe show, and being quite, I think there was a lot of cynicism directed towards that show that was quite hypocritical.
that I, Louisa, hello, am one of the most influential comedians of his generation to come at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And my debut show was called What Would Beyonce Do? And so I thought I could tell you all about it.
I think there are comedians today who don't know they're influenced by her.
Welcome to... Are you influenced yet? Are you influenced yet? Are you influenced yet? If you're not, you probably have no idea who I am, that my work has had significant impact. I see it, like I see it in people, I see it in shows. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. I did that. And do you know what? I just thought I would give you some behind the scenes. So what I thought we could do is we could watch the show together and I would break it down, what I did, what I put in it, how it came to that. But first of all, I want to start at the very, very beginning. So when I first started doing stand-up comedy, the reason I did stand-up is because from the age of about 4 or 5, I grew up speaking Polish as a first language. I found it difficult growing up to make many friends, and the friends I had I loved, and we were very playful and clowny together. That's how we communicated, that's how kids communicated. And as I got older, I felt quite the weirdo because my parents were divorced, I spoke Polish, it was, it was just odd. My mum gave me a bowl haircut, it was odd. I had 3 brothers, she just wanted to save time. Growing up, my grandma, who was Polish, my babcia, was my best friend, and she went to church a lot. And so we really bonded on Sister Act. Sister Act 1 was my favourite film of all time, and my grandma loved it because it was a bunch of nuns. And so I remember making her howl in bed at night by being like, give it some of that deep shoulder action, and she would lose her mind. And I loved how laughter made me feel. And growing up in a household that was not safe and didn't feel good, and there was lots of back and forth and courts and all sorts of nonsense going on at the time, the thing that made me feel really grounded was the sound of laughter. And that's not really changed. And so throughout my childhood, I wanted to pursue comedy, but I was never good at being in front of people. In fact, I would turn into a weird gremlin. Every time it would come to like a showcase or drama classes, in the drama class at school, I would do really well. As soon as it was showcase time, I would turn into a really shy, wanting to stick to the back of the room kid. But in the rehearsals, in the classroom, I could do really well. Like when I felt comfortable, I could do really well. But when I felt watched, I bombed. And so I ended up doing performing arts at A-level because I really loved drama and acting and comedy. And I wanted to go to drama school, and I auditioned for all the major drama schools and tried to get a scholarship. And they all said no. And I can't really blame them because I was not very good in my auditions because, again, I would panic and not be very good. And then I went to Salford And Salford, I saw, had a stand-up module as well as classical acting. And I thought Shakespeare and stand-up, the perfect combination. So I applied to Salford to do Shakespeare and stand-up, and I got an unconditional offer. And then when it came to September to go there, I thought, what are you doing? You can't do stand-up as a career. Like, nobody's gonna hire you as a stand-up. This is a ridiculous thing. Like, this doesn't happen for kids like me. And so my mum said, why don't you do a degree in communications instead? My mum used to teach English as a foreign language, and I thought, you know what? That's a much more sustainable career, actually. And so I went through clearing, and I went to Lincoln University, and I was there for 3 months. And I met 2 girls called Delia and Pascal, and we became great friends. And I was like, what are you doing at Lincoln University? You should be doing stand-up at Salford. So I quit Lincoln. I did a gap year, and I worked selling massage machines in department stores and in a pub, and promo work, flyering in garden centres. And then I went to Salford, and by the 3rd year I did stand-up. And the first class, what we had to do is we had to go out, and the guy said, go out and think of a funny story and come back and tell it. I went to the toilet, and I had my friend Zoe there, and we were both going like, what do we do, what do we do, what do we do? And I came back in, and I talked about how I fancied one of the professors. And it was so easy, and it felt so natural. And I was like, oh, this is what I do. This is, yeah. It's not that I discovered stand-up. It's not that I found it, because I would watch stand-up TV, would watch stand-ups on TV, and I'd be like, well, I'm not a man in a suit. I don't do those kind of gags. But I love watching Bullseye, and I think Michael Barrymore's really funny, and I think Steve Martin's really funny. I think Robin Williams is really funny, and I think they're really playful and silly, and they had their silly-like quality. And I was like, well, I can do that. And so that first class at Salford Uni, I was like, oh yeah, that's the name for it. Like, it's what I am. It's not that I discovered it, it's what I am. I just realised that was the name for it. And we did the class, and 6 weeks later we had to do a showcase. And because I was the strongest in the class in terms of confidence, they were like, you go on first, Louisa. You open the show. And if you know stand-up, opening is often a really tricky job, because the audience is what you'd call cold. So they've just come in, they've just settled, they don't know what to expect. And the first act kind of takes the edge off for everybody else. And I did all right. I was nervous, I was anxious, I mumbled a bit, and I did all right. And I came off, and then my best friend Zoe went on stage in opening the second half, which is one of the most beautiful spots, because everyone's had a drink, everyone's calmed down and was relaxed. Also, Zoe's incredibly talented, and she smashed it. They loved her. And I remember feeling so disappointed and disheartened that I didn't do better, and that it was a silly idea to try. And this idea of comparison always kind of made me fall short and doubt myself, because I was like, you're not good enough, you're just not good enough, like, you're never going to be good enough. And I did stand up a couple more times, and I remember getting a review that said a really smutty set from Louisa Omulan, and I didn't understand it, why they were calling me smutty, because I was just trying to be funny. I didn't comprehend. And so I quit stand-up for a couple of years. So that's when I was about 21, and I quit. And then for a couple of years, I graduated with a first class degree. I got the highest first in my year. Couldn't get an agent. They were like, we've got brown hair, brown eyes, we don't need you. And I was like, what do I do? Because I really want to perform. And I couldn't get on stage. I tried amateur dramatic groups in my local theatre, my local churches. Like, I tried to get on stage. And eventually I could not sleep for thinking about stand-up. And I had this idea about, like, how long does it take for it to boil an egg? Like, how long does it take to boil an egg? Like, chicken, egg, timing. And like, when guys text back, like, why are they not texting back quickly enough? Like, what are they doing? Like, are they busy making an apple pie? Like, why did boys not text back? We've got to think of ways to text boys. Like, what's a really good, easy excuse to text a boy? You could be like, oh, hi, how long does it take to boil an egg? Lol. And I really like this routine of how long does it take to boil an egg. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night and writing it on my notebook. And I kept thinking about it, kept thinking about comedy, kept thinking about it. And I was like, well, I like the American greats, so go to America. So I called this comedy school in the US that had a master's in comedy. And I thought, I'll do that. I'll save up and I'll go do that. So I had a call with them, and they said, actually, we've just had an Irish guy complete the course. He's living in London now. You should totally meet him. And I went to go meet this Irish guy who was incredible. And I fell in love with him the day I met him. And he was like, Louisa, you don't need to go anywhere. You can do stand-up right here in London. There's a whole scene. There's an open mic scene. You could do comedy. Let me show you Time Out magazine. He showed me the magazine, and you could pick gigs, and you could just show up. All you got to do is be funny. Just show up. And because I was so nervous, he was like, why don't you do a course first? There's a guy called Logan Murray who runs courses. Do a stand-up course. Try that. So I did the stand-up course, I tried that, and I would go watch this Irish guy perform, and he'd be phenomenal, and he'd get standing ovations, and I would be like, wow, how do you make an audience go so feral that they literally rise for you? Like, it was incredible. I was in awe. And at this time I was still working several jobs. Like, I was working in a call centre for an IT company, and I was working in a bar, and then it got to the point that he was like, why don't you come to Edinburgh Fringe Festival? Now, I never thought that place was accessible for me. I thought it was for drama school kids, like it wasn't me. And he said, come along. And he had a friend there who had a show, and he needed a flyer. So I went along, and my job was to stand outside his show midday and give out flyers and say, come and see this show. And I loved it. I loved feeling connected. I loved being brought in to a couple of boys and being part of their team. I loved being under the wing of those comedians and watching what they did and how they did it. And then I would go off and do my little 5-minute spots. And over the years, that grew from doing 5-minute spots to 10-minute spots, and it grew to doing a two-hander in Edinburgh, which is where two of you get up and do shows. I was a tree in a kids show. I was doing all these things, and I fell in love with that Irish guy, and I totally was besotted with him, and he wasn't interested in me, and we dated very briefly. It wasn't very long at all, in fairness. And when we broke up, I was distraught and devastated, and I had tried to enter a few comedy competitions, didn't get very far. I remember entering a competition called Funny Women, and at the time the booker called me and said, Louisa, we really like you, but looking how you look and talking about what you talk about, like texting boys, and it's a bit crass. Nobody wants that. You know, you shouldn't look like you look on stage. Why don't you let us write the material for you? We'll do it for you, and then maybe we'll put you through to the semi-final. What do you think? And I remember calling the Irish guy and crying my eyes out, and he was like, don't you dare. You do you. You absolutely do you. Do not let somebody else write your jokes for you. And so we'd fallen out, I was heartbroken, and in the UK I felt stuck. So I read about a place called Second City in America, which is many of the greats are trained, like Tina Fey, John Candy, all these guys. And they did modules, 8-week modules. And so I signed up for 3 months at Second City, the Comedy Sports Theatre, and the IO. They were 3 institutions of comedy in Chicago. And I saved up all my money from my, I was doing massage machines again, and promo work and call centres. I was doing everything, and I took myself out to Chicago, and I stayed in a woman's house where she had a mezzanine bed above her bed, so my bed overlooked her bed. It was weird, but it was fine. And I did comedy 8 hours a day, every day, all the time, and I loved it. I loved it so much, and I was so excited to come back home. And I was like, I'm just going to show off my new skill sets. I'm so excited to play. And I came back, and I had a call from a company called a bingo company that played music when they did bingo, and they wanted a new host. And so I was like, I can do that. I can improvise. I can go on stage and do that. And so I started going on stage, and audiences could win a cheese toasty machine. And so I would be on stage, and I would be like, guys, you know, if you guess the song right, you know, come and say bingo, and we give you a cheese toasting machine. And then I was like, how can we make this more exciting? And learning what I learned from improv is I started improvising with the audience. And I was like, why don't we get you to do a rap battle? And I'd get them to rap battle. And then I was like, why don't we get you guys to do a dance off? And then I'd get them to do a dance battle, and got them to do like the single ladies dance. And what I learned in that moment is I could get audiences to go feral over a cheese toasty machine, but how did I get them to react like that when I was doing stand-up? Because I would be back in clubs trying to gig, and I would get male comics being like, you're not a comedian, you're not a stand-up, you don't do jokes. Like, it's not it's not comedy. But I knew I was funny, and I knew I could make people feel something. And so what I started doing is connecting all the dots. The improvisation, the clowning, the audience participation, and the music from the musical bingo, and the stand-up. And it was time to go to Edinburgh again, and I'd done 2-handers, I'd done 3-handers, I'd done shows where I remember doing a show with an Hollyoaks actor, James, who was wonderful. And people would only come to see James, and I had to open for James, and I would die on my arse every day for 26 days in a row because all the girls were there to see James. And I remember doing an improv show across town, and I had to be back in time to do a stand-up set with my friend Rachel, and Rachel was a headliner. She played the Comedy Store. I was not playing the Comedy Store. And by the time I would leave my show to get over to the other side of town, the show would have already started. So Rachel would open, and I would have to follow Rachel. And there's something about going before somebody that everybody's dying to see, or going after somebody that's killed it, that just makes you better, that just makes you a better performer. Like, you have to reach. I always remember this experiment where they say if you teach people at the education that they're at, they'll never learn, but if you teach them just above, they kind of strive. I felt like a potato in a cupboard trying to reach the sun. Like, you had to really sweat to work it. And so I'd had all this training, and I was like, well, maybe it's ready to do a debut show, but what could my debut show be about? And somebody said, well, why don't you get all the jokes you've ever written and put that in your debut show? And I was like, okay. So I started this idea. I was like, okay, I could do the show. It'd be like Louisa Omilan show, and I could do that. What would be in it? I could put in my egg joke, my how long does it take to boil an egg joke. And I put that in there. In a musical bingo, I'd started doing cow impressions, because I read this fact that cows have accents depending on where they're from. And I was like, that's actually really funny. So what, like a Scottish cow is like Scottish moo, Irish mur. And I put that in there. And the Irish guy that I was in love with we'd still been talking and stuff, and it got to Christmas before the Edinburgh, and we'd still been talking. I'd come back from Chicago. I was kind of hopeful that maybe we'd get back together, and two things happened. He was going to be at a comedy gig, and I was booked for the same gig. So I got all dressed up nice, hoping to see him, and I'd bump into him, and it'd be cool, like we hadn't really spoken that much. And I got there, and I was so happy to see him. And I went to get my spot to go on stage, and I was waiting in a corridor, and they were about to say, like, Louise Omilan, welcome to stage Louise Omilan. And as they were saying it, I turned round and I saw my Irish guy, and this gorgeous girl came in and just jumped to him and gave him a big kiss, and they just snogged, and they were like, welcome to stage Louise Omilan. And I didn't have the skill or the know-how to be like, guys, somebody I'm crazy in love with is a new girlfriend and they're there, and I didn't realise, and I got all dressed up because I thought maybe me and him could get back together. And I left the place, walked down the hill, and I fell flat on my ass, and I really hurt my bone on my bum. And I went home, and I was like, this feels horrible. And that was November time. And on Christmas, my mum had students that she was teaching English as a foreign language, and we just had this dynamic that was difficult, the kids in the house. And my little brother on Christmas Day took an overdose and tried to kill himself, and we rushed him into A&E and tried to get him help, and there was no help. And I remember being in the hospital and struggling to access help, and then there was no one to call. There was no one to speak to. And I was so angry at him for doing that, because I was like, we're all having, like, I was planning on doing that, you dickhead, you beat me to it. And we had to pretend that nothing had happened because my mum had students in the house. And again, I felt like I was on fire. So we had Christmas Day the next day, and everybody's like, and it was awful. And then I went online and I saw my ex had updated his profile picture to a picture of him and his new girlfriend. And I was distraught. And a good friend of mine, Jason, said, why don't you come to the comedy club? And I was like, no. Nothing is funny about this. I feel like I'm on fire. This is horrible. And he said, come on stage. And we went down to Top Secret, which was in the Africa Centre in central London. And I was at the back of the room, and they said, Louisa O'Milan. And I started saying about how my brother was in the hospital and he tried to kill himself. And I was like, what? I was going to do that. And they got a laugh. And I was like, oh, that's a relief. oh, that's a relief. I felt connected. I didn't feel such an outsider. I didn't feel such a weirdo. I didn't feel like the odd Polish kid. I felt loved, actually. I felt so much love and connection because I was like, oh. And then I talked about seeing my ex's picture she changed his profile picture. And then I was like, never mind, I'll find someone like you. And people were laughing. And then I started sliding down the wall. I was singing this song. And then you realise the people in a comedy club on Boxing Day is because they had a shit Christmas too. And the healing in that room was phenomenal. And I thought, this is it. This is my show. This is what I'm going to talk about. But at the time, that's not what stand-up shows are meant to be, and especially not coming from a woman. And I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And so I started putting together all my material, and I had it. And I thought, well, it's going to be quite depressing stuff. So when you play, like, when you talk about your suicide stuff, you've got to have like something happy afterwards. And because the musical bingo taught me the music could lift an audience, I thought, well, put music in it. Like, why don't you put music in it? You love Beyonce. Why don't you put Beyonce music in it? And at the time, I had this friend called Vicky, and we went to a Wetherspoons. We were drinking Blue Lagoon out of a jug in onesies. And she was like, we're the same age as Beyonce. I was like, yeah. She was like, she's selling out arenas. I was like, yeah. She's like, we're drinking Blue Lagoon in our Wetherspoons. I was like, yeah. My family's on fire, and my ex-boyfriend has a new girlfriend, and I've got a first-class degree and a dream of stand-up, and yet bomb every time I'm in front of people. And she was like, yeah, what would Beyonce do? And I was like, what would Beyonce do? So I started putting music in and matching, and I'm doing a bit and then playing a song. And then another friend of mine came along and said, well, why don't you theme the jokes? So everything that's about mental health, put that together. Things about your family, put that together. Things about dating, put that together. And then why don't you find a Beyonce song to match the content? And I was like, why did I not think of this before? So I want to share with you, this is one of my first pages. How I would write is I would get all my shows on pieces of paper and I would clip it. And this is one of the original things. So this was beauty, as you can see, home, love, politics, diva. And I would put all my material that was related. And I would end on a Cher song and doing cow impressions, because I thought that's a really good ending. I'll end on Cher and do cow impressions. And so I had like a rough idea of how this was going to work, this show. And then what you do normally is you do a preview where you rehearse the show in front of an audience again and again and again. And I couldn't get stage time, but Top Secret Comedy Club was open at like 5, 6 o'clock. Like they were getting cleaners are ready for the show. So I asked if I could do a preview at Top Secret. And they were like, sure, if you can get people in. So at 6 p.m, I would fly outside Top Secret on a Tuesday and be like, come and see a show called What Would Beyonce Do? It's free, come on in. And it was the first preview at 6 o'clock. That wasn't a thing before. That's something that I started at Top Secret. And now, if you get the chance to go see previews, go, they're amazing. But it wasn't done at the time. And because I didn't have an agent, didn't have a manager, didn't have a team, I started writing to agents and managers and say, hey, I'm going to be in Edinburgh, would you come and see me? Would you come and see me? And I'd get no reply. I wasn't connected. And so I booked myself a room on the Free Fringe, which I'd seen my Irish guys play. And I booked a venue that I liked, that I'd done before. That I'd also played the Free Fringe. I liked this room called the Meadow Bar. I'd done my two-hander there with Rachel. I knew the room. So I booked it for Edinburgh. I thought, I'm going to commit and I'm going to put on my show, my Louisa O'Milan show, and I'm going to do it and it's going to be really cool. And I started previewing the show. And then I was like, nobody's going to come to a show called Louisa O'Milan because nobody knows who Louisa O'Milan is. And how do I get people to know that the show is out there for them? And slowly at my previews, girls and gays started coming along to my show. and that's who my show was for. And they started doing the word of mouth for me. And so I was like, call it What Would Beyonce Do? Because that's literally a flag to be like, hey, if you like the title, you're going to love this show. So I started going up and down the country because I wanted to make sure that when I arrived in Edinburgh, it wasn't going to be a boot camp for me. I wanted to be shit hot from day one. I couldn't afford not to be because I needed to get seen. I wanted people to like what I did. So I did 33 previews in gay bars up and down the country, from Glasgow to Bournemouth, or Brighton, just playing different rooms to 6 people, 12 people, 20 people, doing shows, and trying to work out this order of this show. And I would be wearing stuff like this, I'd wear whatever. And I liked wearing clowny stuff on stage, I felt really comfortable. And I remember being in Sheffield and I walked past a charity shop and I found these incredible black and white trousers. These ski pants, sorry, it was a sports shop first, and in the sales bargain bucket there's these £10 ski trousers. I was like, they're epic, I'm buying them. And as I walked next door was a charity shop, and on a hanger they had a gold glittery top, and I thought, this is epic, I'll buy this. And then I went to Sheffield Uni to do a preview with a friend of mine, Stephen, and I was like, Stephen, got a great idea, I think this could totally go. And I put on the gold top with the black and white trousers, because I was like, black and white, that's like cow, but then like, this is like Beyonce, so it's like Beyonce and cows, this is perfect. And I did the show in that outfit, and I was like, this is the one, this is the outfit. And the second reason that show right then was spectacular and really momentous in Sheffield after my previews was, I'd been sat at home, I'd just done Brighton Fringe Festival, and I was ending on my Cher song, and people were like, you can't end on a Cher song. I was like, why not? And they were like, because it doesn't make any sense, it's called What Would Beyonce Do? But I was like, but I really like improvising Cher songs. And they were like, no. And so I started watching Beyonce videos to be like, well, what song could I end on? And then I played Survivor. And in the video to Survivor, she's crawling on the floor as she gets out of the sea. And I was like, crawling on the floor as she gets out of the sea. What if, when I do Adele and I slide down the wall, I crawl on the floor, and then I da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and I got goosebumps. I was like, Mum, watch this. And she was like, darling, I've got no idea what you're doing. And I was like, it's going to be genius. And so when I went into Sheffield, that was the first time where I dropped the Cher song and I crawled on the floor. And I took that show up to Edinburgh Fringe Festival with my black and white trousers and my gold glittery top. And I was so excited to do it on the Free Fringe, and I was really hoping to get an audience. And I'd written to all these newspapers, try and get them in, and like there was a really prestigious like Chortle and the Scotsman, Kate Copstick, and I was really trying to get these people in, and I had no answer from anybody. And then I'd worked so hard. I'd worked 3-day jobs at the time. I worked in Wilkinson's packing boxes, I worked as a postwoman, I worked in a bar. And I got to Edinburgh Fringe Festival my first day, and I was sharing a room with a friend, Mark Burrows, and I got sick. I got so sick on my first day, and I had to cancel the show, and I was absolutely devastated. And then I heard that Kate Copstick had booked to see the show, and I was heartbroken, but I was not well. 2 days later, I was well enough. I went to go do the show. I had my black and white trousers on, I had my gold glittery top, I put on a grey hoodie, and I walked to the Meadow Bar from my flat, and there was a queue outside. And I was like, oh, they must be waiting to come out or get into another show, like whatever. And I walked to the queue and I said, hey, what are you waiting to see? And they said, we're here for the Beyonce show. And that was day one of Edinburgh Fringe Festival, 2012.
And I don't think people will know how much Before Louisa did those shows at Edinburgh, especially the What Would Beyonce Do show. The difference in how people approach the Fringe. And there were some people now, like fantastic new comics, who approach the Fringe and follow Louisa's kind of blueprint and probably don't know that that's what they're doing.
Let's watch the show, shall we?